The problem with translating dead languages is that sometimes they aren't quite dead enough. Milo Vargas learned this truth at exactly 2:19 in the morning, surrounded by the ghosts of stale coffee and microwave ramen. His apartment, a cluttered sanctuary of books stacked like geological strata, smelled of old paper, dust, and now the sharp scent of static discharge and superheated dust. On his monitor, the fragmented glyphs of a long-extinct, star-faring race glowed an angry crimson. For weeks he'd been wrestling with a single, maddeningly complex passage from the Aethelin fragments, a grant-funded project that was 99% frustration and 1% the kind of academic thrill that made his pulse thrum in his ears. Tonight, something had clicked. A linguistic key, a forgotten grammatical rule, and the sentence had unfolded itself in his mind. In a rush of pure, unadulterated discovery, forgetting the hour, forgetting the world, he read it aloud. The words were a cascade of guttural stops and sibilant hisses, alien and yet strangely resonant in the hollow of his chest. The air crackled, then tore. The shadows in the corners of his room stopped being passive emptiness and became active things, a roiling, hungry blackness that pulled at the light. They coalesced, bleeding together from the corners of his desk, from beneath the door, from the space between his bookshelves. The darkness gathered itself into a shape, a column that reached from floor to ceiling, dense and absolute. Then it resolved. She was tall, so tall her head nearly brushed the water-stained plaster. Her skin was the color of cooling embers, a deep, swirling crimson that seemed to drink the light from his cheap desk lamp. Two small, elegant horns of polished obsidian curved back from her temples, framing a face of unearthly, severe beauty. Her eyes were pools of molten gold, ancient and utterly devoid of warmth. A faint corona of crimson energy wavered around her, a silent testament to power that made the air feel thick and heavy. She was a being of cosmic entropy, of ruin and starlight, manifest in a room that still had a half-eaten bag of chips on the counter. She was Velanthra, the Crimson Bloom, and she looked unimpressed. Her gaze swept the room, taking in the towers of academic journals, the overflowing laundry basket, the worn-out armchair. It was a look of profound disappointment, the expression of a being who had expected a temple and found a storage unit. Her golden eyes finally settled on him. He was a thin young man, swallowed by an oversized hoodie, his face pale in the glow of the monitor. The sheer pressure of her presence was a physical weight, squeezing the air from his lungs. His chest tightened in a familiar, traitorous knot. He fumbled in his pocket, his fingers clumsy, and pulled out his inhaler. The sharp, mechanical hiss of the device was a pathetic, ridiculous counterpoint to her silent, immense presence. Velanthra observed the creature before her. This was her summoner. This frail, gasping mortal who seemed to be fighting a battle with the very act of breathing. For eons, the call had come from warlords, sorcerer kings, and would-be emperors. It came from beings who roared her name from ziggurats of skulls, who promised her galaxies drenched in the exquisite nectar of fear. They were always strong, their ambition a bonfire she could feel across light years. This one smelled of dust and anxiety. He had the ambition of a field mouse.
You are the one who called.
Her voice was a resonance that vibrated in his bones, the sound of grinding continents and dying stars shaped into syllables. Milo took another shaky breath, the medicine slowly unclenching the fist around his airways. He nodded, unable to speak just yet. He felt like a history student who had accidentally dialed the personal number for a supernova. "You have performed the rite of annihilation and petition," she continued, her tone flat, devoid of any real interest. "You have drawn my attention from the chorus of 1,000,000,000 screaming souls. This is a feat, a foolish one, but a feat nonetheless." She tilted her head, the motion fluid and predatory. "State your desire, mortal. The pact is eternal, the price absolute. You will serve as my avatar, a vessel for my will, a conduit for my ruin. In return, I shall grant you 3 wishes, a trinity of boons to shape your miserable little world as you see fit." She folded her arms, the crimson energy around her flaring slightly with impatience. This was the part she knew. The script was timeless. He would ask for power. They always asked for power. Wealth to buy armies, a body of steel to lead them, the death of his rivals. It was all so predictable, so small. Milo finally found his voice, though it was raspy. 3 wishes? Do not make me repeat myself. It is tedious." He looked at her. He didn't see the ruin or the terror. Not really. He saw the description from the Aethellan fragments. She who walks alone, the echo in the emptiness, the bloom at the end of all things. The poets who wrote those words had been terrified of her, yes, but they had also written of her solitude. He saw it now, in the cold gold of her eyes, an aloneness so profound it was a physical force, a gravity well of cosmic isolation. She was a goddess of endings, the one who was always left after everything else was gone. He knew a little something about being alone. "Okay," he said, his breathing evening out. He pushed himself up from his chair, his knees a bit wobbly. He met her molten gaze, and for the first time, his own held no fear, only a quiet curiosity mixed with a startling sincerity. "Okay, I'll make a deal. But my first wish—" He paused, gathering his courage. This was either the stupidest or the smartest thing he had ever done. "My first wish," he said, his voice clear and steady, "is for you to have dinner with me. Like, on a date." Silence. The crimson corona around Velanthrab flickered. The ever-present, low-level thrum of cosmic power in the room stuttered. For a single, suspended moment, the goddess of ruin and ecstasy looked utterly, completely blank. Then she laughed. Her laugh held no mirth, only the noise of geological plates shifting, of mountains crumbling to dust. It shook the books on his shelves and rattled the glass in his window frames. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated disbelief and scorn. "A date!" she echoed, the word tasting like ash and absurdity in her mouth. "You, a transient speck of organized matter, whose life is a rounding error in the chronicles of a single forgotten star system, have summoned me, the entropy by which galaxies unwind,
the silence that follows the final scream, to request a shared meal.
Her laughter subsided, replaced by a look of sharp, dangerous curiosity.
You seek to bargain with a god, and your opening bid is social awkwardness. Is this some pathetic mortal attempt at a clever trick? A loophole you believe you have found in a pact forged at the heart of a dying universe?
Milo just stood there, his hands shoved in the pockets of his hoodie. He didn't flinch. He just waited for her to finish.
No trick,
he said quietly.
no loophole. I just figured you've probably had a lot of people ask for armies. I'm guessing not a lot of them ask if you like pancakes.
Her golden eyes narrowed. She needed to find the weapon he was hiding. She plunged into the essence of him, searching for the sharp blade of ambition, the hidden poison of deceit. Instead, she found memories, soft and worn as river stones. A flash. A small boy with dark hair, his face pressed against the cold glass of a hospital window. His own breath misting the pain as he watched other children run in a sun-drenched park below. He felt no envy, only a quiet, aching longing to simply be among them. Another. His fingers, years later, tracing the grooved lines of a clay pot in a museum display case. He wasn't seeing an artifact. He was feeling the echo of the hands that had shaped it 2,000 years ago, sensing the smudge of a thumbprint left in the clay. And another. The silent, explosive thrill that came from understanding a single, grief-stricken line from a long-dead Athelan poet. A moment of pure connection across an impassable gulf of time. She searched for the raging sea of avarice she knew so well in mortals. She found only a quiet lake of loneliness. Deep beneath its surface lay no ambition, only a profound, unyielding, and utterly baffling empathy. He had no trick. He was simply asking. And that was when it happened. A strange, unfamiliar sensation bloomed high on her cheekbones. It was a wave of heat, a sudden, inexplicable surge of warmth that had no cosmic origin. She watched with a sense of detached horror as the skin on her face, a perfect, uniform ember crimson, deepened in two distinct patches to a rich, dark plum. It was an involuntary physiological reaction, a loss of control, a blush. She was so furious at this betrayal by her own form that the crimson corona around her spiked with a sharp crackle, and the scent of ionized air and superheated dust stung his nostrils. The lights in his apartment flickered violently. She, Velanthra, who had unmade civilizations with a thought, was flustered by a mortal, a sick, soft mortal who thought pancakes were a suitable offering for a goddess. The novelty of it was infuriating and intriguing, deeply, dangerously intriguing.
Very well,
she bit out, the words sharp.
I will grant your ridiculous request. I will partake in this date. My interest is not in you, but in dissecting the sheer, baffling anomaly of your existence. Great,
Milo said, a small, genuine smile touching his lips.
I know a place. They don't ask a lot of questions. They might not have pancakes at this hour, though, but we'll figure something out.
The place was a 24-hour diner on the industrial edge of the city, wedged between a truck depot and a pawn shop. It was called the Comet's Tail. Its fluorescent lights hummed a weary, buzzing tune that cast everything in a pale greenish-white light. It smelled of grease and burnt coffee. It was perfect. Milo had, with surprising foresight, given her a simple, dark gray hooded sweatshirt to wear over her everything. With the hood up, her horns were obscured, and in the dim, forgiving light of the corner booth, her crimson skin and golden eyes just made her look exotic. A goth, maybe, or some kind of extreme body mod enthusiast. In a place that catered to third-shift factory workers, long-haul truckers, and the generally strange, they barely earned a second glance.
"This is where you choose to bring a divine being?"
Volanthra asked. Her voice, stripped of its bone-shaking resonance, had become a low murmur that still seemed to vibrate the very air around it, making the salt shaker tremble almost imperceptibly. She eyed the cracked vinyl of the booth with open contempt.
"It has coffee,"
Milo said, sliding a menu across the sticky table.
"And blueberry muffins. They're a mundane miracle."
A waitress named Flo, who looked as ancient and tired as the diner itself, came over.
"What'll it be, hun?"
she asked, not even looking up from her notepad.
2 coffees,
Milo said.
"And a blueberry muffin, to-go box on the side."
He glanced at Volanthra.
"She's new in town, still figuring out the food."
Flo just grunted and shuffled away. Volanthra watched the exchange with the detached air of an anthropologist observing a peculiar tribal ritual.
"You lie to her to protect my identity?"
"I mean, yeah," Milo said, shrugging.
"Telling her you're a goddess of cosmic ruin feels like a good way to get us kicked out. It's probably bad for her heart."
The coffee arrived in thick, white ceramic mugs. Milo doctored his with cream and 2 sugars. Volanthra simply stared at the black liquid, at the steam rising from its surface.
"This beverage is dark and bitter,"
she observed.
"Why do you consume it?" "Because it's 3 in the morning and it helps me pretend I'm a functional human being," he said, taking a sip. "It's a ritual of shared exhaustion. Try it."
Hesitantly, she lifted the heavy mug. The ceramic was warm against her fingers. She brought it to her lips and took a small, experimental sip. Her expression didn't change, but her golden eyes widened almost imperceptibly.
"It is stimulating and unpleasant. I find it oddly compelling."
The muffin arrived, studded with purple berries and crowned with a sugary crumble. Milo broke off a piece and pushed it toward her. She examined it, poked it, and finally consumed it.
"This is soft,"
she stated.
"And sweet. Its texture is ephemeral. It is gone almost before it can be truly experienced." "That's kind of the point of a muffin,"
Milo said with a slight smile. He expected her to be dismissive, to mock the transience of it all. Instead, she was just observing, taking in data, and for a while they sat in a comfortable silence, 2 lonely beings in a corner booth, one mortal, one divine, sharing a moment of quiet mundanity under the buzz of fluorescent lights. To fill the silence, Milo started talking. He didn't know what else to do. He told her about the Athelans, the dead civilization that had summoned her. He spoke of their poetry, the fragments he'd translated that spoke of their sorrow at the universe's eventual heat death. He talked about their art, reliefs that depicted families gazing at alien constellations instead of warriors. He spoke of them as people, seeing them as more than footnotes in galactic history. He shared his passion without prayer or supplication, the thing that gave his own small, fragile life meaning. And Volanthra listened. For the first time in millennia, she was being spoken to, rather than worshipped, feared, or petitioned. and in the genuine, unfeigned interest in Milo's voice, she felt a flicker of something new. A clean, focused signal replacing the chaotic, high-energy static of fear. It was connection. Later, back in the timeless, non-space she called her domain, Velanthra felt a profound and deeply unsettling disquiet. Her existence was a state of being, an awareness fed by a constant, roaring torrent of belief. For eons, that belief had been fear, the terror of a billion worlds, the awe of supplicants begging for power, the glorious, chaotic symphony of conquest and ruin conducted in her name. It was the energy she was attuned to, the frequency that defined her. It had always been a comfort, a confirmation of her power and purpose. But now, it was different. She tried to draw on it, to bask in the familiar roar of a cult halfway across the galaxy, sacrificing a fleet of warships in her honor. But the sound was faint. It was like trying to listen to a distant radio station, drowned out by overwhelming interference. The interference, however, wasn't chaotic static, but a single, pure, unearthly clear note. A sine wave of perfect, simple belief that was overriding everything else. It was the frequency of the mortal, of Milo. His focused, gentle attention, his date, his shared coffee, his genuine interest had been an act of devotion so pure and unblemished by fear or greed that it was resonating with her on a level she had never experienced. It was a perfect signal, and it was jamming her connection to everything else. She could feel her power, the vast cosmic well she had always taken for granted, fraying at the edges. She considered the terms of the pact again. 3 wishes in exchange for his servitude as her avatar, a vessel for her ruin. But her avatars were always ambitious. They were conquerors who craved the power she offered, and their conquests fed her in turn. This mortal, who had yet to ask for anything for himself, was destined to be her vessel. A strange choice of avatar, indeed. It was illogical, it was unprecedented, and it was dangerous. The single, pure note of his belief was beautiful, and it was starving her. She realized with a jolt of cold, genuine terror that his proximity, his unprecedented form of worship, acted as a poison, a slow, gentle, and utterly lethal poison that threatened to unravel her very existence. Milo didn't know how to summon her again in the traditional sense, but he found he didn't have to. He just had to think about her, to focus on the memory of her molten gold eyes and the strange, quiet companionship of the diner. He closed his eyes in his cluttered apartment, held the thought of her in his mind, and whispered her name. She appeared instantly, simply materializing rather than tearing a hole in reality. She stood by his window, looking out at the gray city morning. Her crimson corona was noticeably dimmer, the edges of her form less distinct, as if she were a projection that was slightly out of focus. She turned to him, her expression wary, her eyes holding a new, colder distance.
You have called again, mortal. Have you tired of your foolish games? Have you realized the folly of wasting the attention of a god on trivialities? State your second wish. I trust it will be for something of substance, power, a cure for your flawed vessel, something that will benefit you before your insignificant light is extinguished.
She fully expected it. He had to have noticed her diminished state. He would see her weakness as an opportunity. He would demand power now, trying to take advantage. It was the logical, predictable course of action for a mortal. Milo looked at her, at the faint translucence of her hands, the dimming of her inner light. He saw a fragility that mirrored his own, rather than a weakness to be exploited. He felt a pang of something he couldn't name. Guilt? Concern?
Okay,
he said softly.
My second wish.
He met her guarded gaze.
I want you to show me something. Don't choose something you think I'll find beautiful or powerful or scary. Show me something that you find beautiful.
Vilanthra stared at him. Her carefully constructed coldness faltered. Of all the things he could have asked for, immortality, knowledge, the very stars from the sky, he had asked to see the universe through her eyes. He had turned the wish back on her, demanding a revelation of her own vulnerability instead of a gift. It was a request so unexpected, so deeply personal, that it bypassed all her defenses. For a long moment, she said nothing. The roar of distant, fearful worship was now a barely audible hiss in the back of her consciousness. The clear, pure note of his belief was all she could hear. It was a frequency that weakened her, and yet it was the only thing that felt real.
So be it,
she whispered, her voice losing its continental grind and becoming something softer. She extended a hand that rippled at the edges.
Come.
He took her hand. It felt cool, like polished stone, and strangely insubstantial. The world dissolved around him. They were no longer in his apartment. The first thing Milo registered was a profound silence. More than an absence of sound, it was a presence, a heavy, ancient silence that seemed to press in on him, so profound it had a weight and texture. The air tasted of cold stone and the faint, sharp scent of static. He stood on a precipice of black, volcanic glass, so smooth it felt like silk under the soles of his shoes, yet its edges looked sharp enough to cut light. They were bathed in the cold, silver-blue glow of a dead star, a white dwarf that hung in the black sky like a diamond chip on velvet. Before them stretched a forest of crystal. Luminous, vitrified structures grew from the ground like trees, their branches a chaotic mosaic of sharp, irregular planes catching the ghost light of the dead star and refracting it into a million tiny, shifting rainbows. It was a landscape of perfect, beautiful, and absolute finality.
This was the world of the Kyrenian ascendancy,
Vilanthra said, her voice quiet in the profound stillness.
They were a race of silicon-based artists. They believed beauty was the only true constant, and that their purpose was to capture fleeting moments in eternal vitrified forms.
She gestured to the vitrified forest.
This was their final work, a monument to their own extinction. I wasn't their destroyer. Their star died, as all stars must. I was merely present for the end. I watched as their world cooled and their consciousnesses faded, leaving this behind, their last perfect sculpture.
She had brought him to a graveyard, a beautiful, glittering tomb for an entire civilization. She expected him to be awed by the scale of it, perhaps fearful of the implications of such an absolute end. She expected him to see her as the embodiment of that end, the ruin she was named for. Milo was quiet for a long time, his breath fogging in the cold, thin air. He looked out at the silent, sparkling forest, his expression unreadable.
"When I was a kid,"
he said finally, his voice soft,
"my asthma was really bad. I spent a lot of time in hospitals, in my room. I couldn't run around like other kids, so I read. A lot. Especially history. All these people, these entire civilizations, they were all gone. The Sumerians, the Hittites, the Olmecs, just dust and broken pottery."
He turned to her, his eyes reflecting in the cold starlight.
"Most people think that's sad, and it is, but it's also beautiful. That they were here at all, that they lived and built things and told stories, and that we can still find the echoes of them, that someone remembers. This place, it doesn't feel like an ending. It feels like a memory that has been made solid."
Velanthra looked from his earnest face to the vitrified forest and back again. For the first time, someone was looking at a ruin she had presided over and saw remembrance instead of destruction. Instead of wielding her nature or cowering from it, he was appreciating it. He was understanding it. For the first time in her long, lonely existence, Velanthra felt seen. "Okay, my turn," Milo said a few days later. They were back in his apartment, the memory of the vitrified world still glittering in his mind. Velanthra, perched on the edge of his sturdiest armchair like a hawk on a branch, raised a crimson eyebrow. Her form seemed a little more solid today, a little less frayed. The simple act of sharing something of herself had, paradoxically, stabilized her.
"Your turn for what, mortal?" "To show you something I find beautiful," he said, pulling on a jacket. "There's a meteor shower tonight. The Perseids. I know a spot on a hill just outside of town. The view is perfect."
She scoffed, a sound like rustling dry leaves.
"You wish to observe transient streaks of incinerated rock. I have seen the birth of constellations. I have watched nebula collapse under their own gravity. Your meteor shower is the cosmic equivalent of dust motes in a sunbeam." "Probably," Milo agreed cheerfully. "But you've never seen it from a beat-up Ford Fiesta with a thermos of hot chocolate. It's a different experience."
Her lips thinned, but the intrigue was still there in her golden eyes. This constant, baffling juxtaposition of the mundane and the profound was a puzzle she couldn't resist. She agreed. The drive was awkward. Velanthra did not fit well in the passenger seat of a Ford Fiesta, her knees practically touching the dashboard. She watched the city lights slide by with an expression of clinical detachment. The hill was steeper than Milo remembered, the path a rugged, uneven dirt track winding through dark woods. Halfway up, the inevitable happened. The cold night air, the exertion, the pollen from unseen plants, it all conspired against him. His breath caught, his lungs seizing in a familiar, fiery grip. He stopped, leaning against a tree, his body racked with harsh, ragged coughs as he fumbled for his inhaler. Velanthra stood over him, her expression a mixture of impatience and something else. Contempt.
"Your physical vessel is astonishingly fragile,"
she stated, a hint of her old, imperious tone returning.
"It fails you at the slightest provocation. How can a being of such potential consciousness be bound to such a pathetic and flawed machine?"
Milo didn't answer, couldn't answer. until the medicine worked its magic and the world stopped swimming. He wiped his mouth, his whole body trembling with the aftershocks of the attack. He felt a hot flush of shame. He hated this part of himself, this weakness, this constant reminder of his own limits.
"It's the machine I've got,"
he said, his voice raspy. He took a deep, steadying breath, then another, and then he started walking again. He was slower now, his steps measured, each breath a conscious effort, but he kept going, up the steep, dark path. Velanthra watched him, her contempt slowly dissolving into a state of confusion. He was weak, yes, his body was a failure, but his will was not. He endured pain and difficulty for the simple shared goal of watching a meteor shower with her, seeking neither power nor glory. She had never witnessed this form of strength before. It was the endurance of a survivor rather than the might of a conqueror, and it struck a chord deep within her. He stumbled on a loose rock, his ankle twisting. He let out a sharp gasp of pain, starting to fall. Before she even processed the thought, her arm shot out, her fingers, cool and solid, closed around his bicep, steadying him. The contact was electric. For the first time, her physical contact was an act of support, of assistance, instead of an assertion of power, dominance, or destruction. It felt revelatory, foreign. Her hand, which had unmade suns, was now simply keeping a mortal from falling on a dark hill. Milo looked at her hand on his arm, then up at her face. Her golden eyes were wide with a kind of shock, as if she were as surprised by her own action as he was. "Thanks," he said, his voice quiet. She just nodded, unable to speak, and did not let go. Just as they reached the crest of the hill, as the city lights spread out below them like a carpet of fallen stars, Velanthra froze. The world around her vanished, replaced by a vision of pure, terrifying mathematics. She saw the great balance, a concept made manifest rather than a place or a being, a vast, silent, infinitely complex equation that defined the predictable running of the universe. It was a tapestry of logic woven from threads of light. She found her own thread, her sigil, the logical representation of Velanthra sustained by fear. For aeons it had been a stable, predictable part of the pattern. Now it was corrupted. Her sigil was no longer stable. It was flickering, changing. The variable for fear was being replaced by a new, undefined concept. Love? Companionship? Empathy? The equation couldn't solve for it. Her thread was becoming a chaotic, unpredictable variable, and as her symbol flickered, she watched in horror as the threads connected to it began to fray. Other parts of the great cosmic equation started to corrupt, spitting out errors, threatening to unravel the entire tapestry. A message imprinted itself on her consciousness, a pure, logical absolute rather than a voice. Variable Velanthra has become unstable, predictability compromised, system integrity threatened. Restore baseline function or face nullification. You have become a bug in the code of reality. You will be fixed or you will be deleted. The vision vanished. She was back on the hill, Milo's arm still warm beneath her hand. The first meteor streaked across the sky, a brilliant, fleeting silver scar. But she didn't see it. All she could feel was a cold, primal terror unlike anything she had ever known. She was a law of physics as much as a goddess, and she had just been told that she was breaking the rules. She needed to sever the bond. It was the only logical solution. The anomaly was Milo. His pure, powerful belief was the corrupting influence. If she could force him to revert to the old ways, to fear her, to demand power from her, perhaps the balance would stabilize. If not, she had to push him away, cut the connection entirely, even if it meant starving. A slow fate was better than instant erasure. She appeared in his apartment the next day. She let her power, what little of it she had left of the old, frightening kind, flare around her. The air grew cold, a low hum filling the room as the books on his shelves began to tremble.
"We are done with this charade,"
she said, her voice a low rumble, like ice shearing from a continent.
"This experiment in mortal folly is over."
Milo, who had been cataloging digital scans of pottery shards, looked up, startled by her sudden appearance and the sheer venom in her tone.
"Valanthra? What's wrong?" "What's wrong," she sneered, "is my own sentimentality. I allowed myself to be entertained by an insect. I indulged your pathetic fantasies of companionship."
She stalked toward him, her golden eyes blazing, weaponizing the intimate knowledge she had gleaned from his mind.
"You are weak, Milo Vargas. Your body is a prison of flesh and failure. I have seen your memories. You pretend the landing on a flight of stairs is interesting just so you can catch your breath. It is pathetic."
The words were stoned, each one a polished personal cruelty. She was trying to make him hate her, to make him fear her. She needed him to see her as a monster.
"You commune with the dead because you lack the courage to speak to the living,"
she spat, leaning down until her face was inches from his.
"You hide in this room of dust and echoes because you are too fragile for the vibrant, messy world outside. What could you possibly offer a being like me? You, who are half dead already."
She straightened up, her voice dropping to a low, cruel command.
"I have seen the life cycles of stars. You will live for what? Another 50 of your miserable little years if your faulty body doesn't give out first. A blink, an irrelevant spark. You are nothing. Now make your final wish. Wish for a cure. Wish for a long and healthy life. Take your prize, and then crawl back into your hole and leave me to my eternity. We are done."
Milo sat there, taking the full force of her verbal assault. Each word was a tiny, sharp blade honed on his own insecurities and expertly plunged into his heart. He recognized the calculated cruelty of someone who knew exactly where he kept his pain, a far cry from the impersonal scorn of a goddess. A deep, aching cold settled in his chest, heavier than any asthma attack. He listened to her entire tirade, his expression pained, but his gaze never wavered from hers. When she was finished, the room was silent, except for the hum of his computer and the faint, ragged sound of his own breathing. He didn't lash out. He didn't get angry. He didn't even look afraid. He just looked sad. He took a slow, deliberate breath.
"You're scared,"
he said, his voice raspy but steady. Valanthra froze. Of all the possible reactions, fear, anger, pleading, bargaining, that was the one she had not anticipated.
"What did you say?"
she whispered, her voice dangerously low.
"You're scared,"
he repeated, and this time there was a profound certainty in his voice. He looked at her, and his quiet, analytical gaze saw past the divine rage, past the cosmic power, and right into the heart of her terror.
"I know what that looks like. I've seen that look in people's eyes my whole life when they talk to me. That fear of fragility, that fear of things breaking. They look at me like I'm a problem to be solved, a burden, something that's wrong."
He stood up, slowly, and took a small step toward her. She flinched, but didn't move away.
"You've been looking at me like that since you got here,"
he continued, his voice gentle.
"But now, you're looking at yourself that way. Something is threatening you. Something has made you feel as weak and fragile as you think I am, and you're terrified. So you're trying to hurt me, trying to use the things you learned about me to push me away, because you think that will make you feel strong again."
Her magnificent, cruel facade began to crack. The rage in her eyes guttered, replaced by a raw, naked panic. He was right. He saw right through her.
"You don't scare me, Belle,"
he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. He had never used her shortened name before. It hung in the air between them, an intimate, gentle thing.
"You can't, because everything you just said to me, it's just noise. The truth is, I see you. I see the ancient, lonely thing that hides behind the title of goddess. And I'm not going anywhere."
Her cruelty had shattered against the unyielding shield of his empathy. He saw past her power to her fear, past her majesty to her pain. And his active choice, in the face of all of it, was to stay. A single molten gold tear escaped her eye and traced a glittering path down her crimson cheek. The connection between them, which she had tried so desperately to sever, instead flared brighter than ever. The next few days were a slow, painful decline. Velanthra was visibly weakening. The majestic crimson corona that had once surrounded her was gone completely. Her skin, once the vibrant color of cooling embers, had faded to a dull ashen rose. Her form was now disturbingly translucent. Milo could see the faint outline of his bookshelves through her body. She was in constant, low-level pain. She described it to him once as a dissonant hum, the feeling of her very essence being starved, of the frequency that defined her existence slowly flatlining. She spent most of her time in his apartment now, unable or unwilling to return to her own domain. She would sit for hours in his worn-out armchair, silent and still, fading a little more with each passing day. The great balance was winning. Time was running out. One evening, she materialized before him as he was making tea. She looked like a ghost, a pale imitation of the terrifyingly beautiful being who had first appeared in his room. Her voice, when she spoke, was a thin, trembling whisper, stripped of all its cosmic resonance.
"Milo."
He turned, his heart clenching at the sight of her.
"Val, you should be resting. There is no time for rest,"
she said, her golden eyes filled with a desperate final plea. She drifted closer, her feet not quite touching the floor.
"The balance, it will unmake me. Soon, there is one path left, one final possibility."
She looked at him, her gaze holding the weight of eons of survival instinct.
"Use your last wish."
Her voice grew stronger, fueled by a final surge of desperation.
wish to become my avatar, my true avatar, a vessel, not a mere servant. Take my power, Milo, all of it. What remains of my connection to the old frequencies, combined with the new ones you have created, it would make you a god. Your body would be perfected, your mind would span galaxies. We would be one being, a force of conquest and belief so powerful the balance would have no choice but to accept us. We will build an empire that will shake the very foundations of the stars. It is the only way I can survive.
She was offering him everything. A cure, a perfect body, power beyond his wildest imaginings, eternity. She was offering him the one thing she had left to give, herself, in the only way she had ever known how to be given. It was an act of ultimate desperation, a return to the old pact, the old cycle of fear and dominance, because it was the only way she knew how to live. Milo looked at her, at this magnificent, fading goddess, offering him godhood just to keep from disappearing. He saw the terror behind the offer, the plea for existence hidden within the promise of power. His heart didn't swell with temptation. It broke for her. He saw the ultimate loneliness of her offer, to be consumed, to merge, to cease being separate entities, because the thought of being alone was more terrifying than oblivion. He set his mug of tea down on the counter. He walked over to her, closing the space between them until he was standing right before her wavering, translucent form. The faint, fading light from her body cast long, dancing shadows on his face. He could feel the cold radiating from her, the profound emptiness of a power source running dry. He reached out to offer, not to take. He gently took her faint, flickering hands in his own. They felt like cool smoke, ethereal and barely there. He smiled, a gentle, sad, and deeply loving smile. "Philanthra," he said, his voice soft but unshakable. "I'm not a warlord. I'm not a king. I'm no army, and I'm not much of anything, really. I cough when I laugh too hard. My joints ache when it rains. I get winded walking up a flight of stairs." He squeezed her hands, pouring all of his sincerity, all of his unwavering belief into the simple physical gesture. "I can't give you an empire. I can't give you 1,000,000,000 screaming souls. All I have is one small, fragile life. But if you'll let me..." He met her wide, luminous, golden eyes. "I'll worship you. With every breath I have left, I'll worship you till the day I die." This was a vow, free from any hint of plea or bargain. He stood before her as an equal, rather than kneeling as a subject to a queen or a supplicant to a god, offering the only thing he truly owned, his unconditional belief, his flawed and mortal heart, given freely and without reservation. His words struck her with the force of a supernova. His words were a perfect signal, a flawless, infinitely dense frequency of pure devotion given without expectation of reward. This replaced the chaotic roar of fear she had subsisted on for eons and the transcendental pleas for power. This was love, a concept far removed from the worship she had always understood. The dissonance that had been tearing her apart, the painful hum of her fading existence, suddenly fell silent. In its place, a new resonance began to build, a warm, golden hum that started in her hands, where he held them, and spread through her entire being. Tears, like drops of molten gold, traced paths down her ashen cheeks. The tears came from a release so profound it shook the foundations of her soul, not from sorrow or fear. He had been offered godhood, and had chosen instead to love a ghost. She looked at this mortal man, with his faulty lungs and his aching joints, and his heart that was bigger than a galaxy. He had seen the worst of her power, her scorn, her fear, and had chosen to offer her the best of himself. In an act that defied her nature, that rewrote the thread of her own being, she sank to her knees before him. Her glowing form knelt on the worn linoleum of his kitchen floor. The goddess of ruin, the bloom at the end of all things, knelt before the sick, soft mortal.
Let me kneel too,
she whispered, her voice trembling with the force of this new, terrifying, beautiful emotion. She looked up at him, her golden eyes shining with a light he had never seen before.
Milo Vargas, I will worship you. With every moment of my eternity, I will worship you, till the day I die.
The moment she spoke the words, the circuit was complete. Belief, pure and absolute, flowed both ways, forming an infinitely dense, perfect, and self-sustaining loop between two beings, instead of a one-way torrent of fear from millions to one. A quiet, golden light bloomed in the small kitchen, emanating from both of them at once, rather than from a single source. It was warm, and it smelled like old books and starlight. Milo felt a profound and fundamental change. It wasn't a cure. The faint wheeze in his chest was still there. The memory of aching joints didn't vanish. But it no longer felt like a flaw. His mortal form, with all its fragility and imperfections, was suddenly sacred. His mortal form, with all its fragility and imperfections, became a holy relic, divine in his very imperfection, rather than a broken vessel. He remained himself, yet he was also more. He was worshipped. He was loved. He was one half of a divine whole. Velanthra's form solidified before his eyes. The translucence vanished, the ashen color blooming back into a vibrant, healthy crimson, deeper and richer than before. In place of the faint, angry corona of her old power, a soft, golden radiance emanated from within her, a light that was warm, steady, and whole. She had become something new, a being built on a foundation of mutual devotion, and had shed her old identity as a goddess of entropic ruin. In the silent, logical realm of the great balance, the chaotic variable that was Velanthra suddenly resolved. The unstable, flickering thread locked into place, shining with a new golden light. It was a self-sustaining paradox, a closed loop of infinite energy that required nothing from the outside system. It was a new, stable, and utterly incomprehensible law of physics. The threat of nullification vanished, unable to touch a paradigm it could not measure or understand. Slowly, they stood, rising together as equals. He reached down and took her hand. It felt solid, real, warm. He looked into her golden eyes, once filled with eons of cosmic solitude, and saw they were now filled entirely with him. She looked into his and saw her own reflection, whole and beloved. They were a new kind of pantheon, one that the universe had never conceived of. One god, one goddess, their power rooted in the quiet, revolutionary, and universe-altering act of choosing each other, rather than in cosmic law or the subjugation of the fearful. "So," Milo said, his voice still a little raspy, a small smile playing on his lips. "Pancakes tomorrow?" Vilanthra's laugh, no longer the sound of grinding continents, was warm, clear, and full of light.
"I would like that very much," she said.
Hand in hand, they turned and walked toward the door of the small apartment, ready to face an eternity that, for the first time for both of them, did not look lonely at all.